Welcome, good afternoon. My name's Nick Hyam. Welcome to the Oxford Martin School, which I'm reminded used to be the Indian Institute, which is why it has some rather fine stonework, sort of vaguely Indian, but also some woodwork, which to me at least looks absolutely, utterly un-Indian, but this is Victorian Oxford for you, so what can you expect? We're here to talk to Derek Frost about Derek Frost's book. He is a designer, he's a photographer, he's an artist, he's a yoga practitioner, he's a gardener, and he is a philanthropist. He's also gay, and he and his husband Jeremy Norman, businessman and entrepreneur who is in the audience, for those who don't know him, have been together for, I've written down nearly 45 years here.
Correct.
That's correct. And on the 21st of December 2005, they were among the very first couples in Britain to sign up for a civil partnership, and they have since become husband and husband. It's now a marriage. Their generation was the first to benefit in Britain from the legalisation of gay sex in 1967. Later, tragically, it was the first generation to encounter the scourge of AIDS. And now Derek has written this memoir, Living and Loving in the Age of AIDS, which is the story of his own life and his life with Jeremy. It's the story of AIDS, and it's the story of the charity that they founded together, AIDS Arc, which we'll talk about a little later, but which helps people struggling with AIDS around the world in places like South Africa, Lesotho, Thailand, Burma, India, and so on. And I will say this now, and I will repeat it at the end, all profits from the sale of the book go to AIDS Arc, I imagine, certainly to charity.
Correct.
Why write a book which, as will become evident as we go on, must have brought back quite a lot of painful memories?
Well, we found ourselves, both in terms of our gay identities and also with the scourge of AIDS, in various ways right in the centre of those experiences. Jeremy started a number of nightclubs, and so we were sort of pivotal in this huge celebration that followed the decriminalisation of homosexuality. And then we were in America in the early 80s when AIDS really started to appear in the West. We were in Key West. Then Jeremy got infected, and we had 6-7 years before the arrival of ARVs when he was struggling to live when a lot of our friends were dying. Actually, I miss out, we started in the mid-80s. We also started our first, or Jeremy started, co-founded our first AIDS charity, Crusade,
yeah,
which was entirely focused on raising funds to help people in the UK. And then when Jeremy was lucky enough to survive post the arrival of ARVs, there was a period of sort of, I suppose, recharging. And then in 2002, we started AIDS Arc. So, you know, we were very central to a lot of experience.
That was 20 years ago, and
yeah,
the sort of story arc of the book takes one to 2002 and the years that followed. You could in some ways have written the book 10 years, 15 years ago. I'm wondering why now? Is it just that you have a perspective?
Yeah, things went back to front in a sense. It's the first thing I thought to do when we resigned as trustees of AIDS Arc, which was in 2016. I thought, because of what we'd achieved during that period, 2002-16, as the charity AIDS Arc, there was an important record to set down, almost for the benefit of the charity. And then I showed that to our brother-in-law, who's had a lifetime in publishing. And he said, it's an important record, but it's not going to be of interest to anyone else. You need to put yourself into this. And then we had a decision to take, because we're basically private people. And the book is very deeply, deeply personal and very honest and exposes a whole load of stuff that went on. And we had to make a decision, is that what we're prepared to do? And because we thought our experience was of value potentially to other people, and particularly to young people and to generations who will follow, I felt I had a sort of duty to do it. So I did.
It's also telling it's all written, I think, in the present tense. And that gives it an immediacy which many books of this kind don't have.
Right.
That was a deliberate decision? Were you encouraged to do that by anybody else, or did you just think that was the way to do it?
I think I thought it was the way to do it. I mean, a big chunk of the book, in the middle of the book, which is the period of time we describe as our war, Jeremy fighting to stay alive, came from diaries I kept at the time. And those were all written in the present. And so in a way that guided it. Yeah. And I think someone probably did say it makes the whole thing more immediate if you write it in the present, so I did.
Good. Now, you compiled and you sent to me a extraordinary collection of pictures, and more than 200 of them, which kind of illustrate the book and the story of your life. And what we've done is culled just a very few of those. So we're going to have a little slideshow. If I can make this work the right way. That's a picture of two of you in 1977, which is the year you met, dressed in pink. Love united us, you say, a year later. It was pretty much love at first sight. Is that over-egging it a bit?
No, it wasn't love at first sight. It was sex at first sight. A very gay thing, of course. Don't hang around in such matters. Love, curiously, didn't happen for about 9 months.
So it was, to begin with, it was just another hookup. He was just another guy.
It was always a lot more than just another chunk of bones. It was always more than that. But I think it wasn't expected necessarily.
Yeah.
Love kind of crept up on us a number of months later.
Now, you were having at the time an absolutely whale at the time. Your lifestyle, I think one could justifiably describe as hedonistic.
Yes.
And partly...
Very hard-working hedonistic. Yeah, very hard.
I'm curious to know where you slept.
Yeah.
When you slept.
Rarely.
When spare us those geographical details, please. And that's partly because of Jeremy's job. You were a designer. Jeremy was launching clubs, and this is the Embassy Club, which was his first venture, 1978, kind of impossibly hip place. But the one, I think, which was really significant was Heaven, the enormous gay club under the arches at Charing Cross, which was... There'd not been anything, certainly in the UK, quite like it, had there?
No, there hadn't. I mean, there hadn't. I mean, the Embassy was also very, very important. I think the Embassy's importance, and that was not a gay club, it was incredibly mixed at a time where society, particularly in black, white, and gay, straight, and all that, were far more separated. And the Embassy Club, rather like Studio 54, celebrated the other in a way. And there was this extraordinary mix of people of all types. And there was a sort of joke about it. It was a place where duchesses danced with rent boys.
Yes.
And it kind of was,
But
Heaven was all...
Much clearer USP.
All about gay men. And although we changed that policy a sort of nine months a year in, the reason for that was that directly we allowed women into the place, straight men would be in the place, and the whole thing would get confused. And in that period of time, it was an acceptable thing to do. I mean, you could never do that now, Yeah. Gay men only, everything. But anyhow, that's how it was for a long time.
Now, that was Jeremy's business. You did the design.
Yeah.
This great kind of hanger-like thing, because you had your own design business. First of all, you worked with others. Then in 83, you set up Derek Frost Associates. There you are, looking very proprietorial. Here is some of your early work, including a goggle head by Elizabeth Frink. Is this a kind of signature Derek Frost? Was this a signature Derek Frost look? The notion of something very modern and very cutting edge with classic antique furniture.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I mean, we put on an exhibition at one stage which was called Modern Furniture and Old Master Paintings.
yeah, right.
And it was to sort of make that contrast. And it was an interesting exhibition, and a lot of people, it changed their sort of view about how you stick stuff together.
Jeremy, meanwhile, is launching lots of other businesses. This is a short-lived one, selling fresh pasta. Then the supermarkets got in on the act, and it didn't.
And we went bust.
Yes, but he also launched a number of other businesses, which perhaps Soho Gyms was the most robust, which carried on. At the same time as you were busily working, and playing in nightclubs, you also had...
Well, running nightclubs.
Running
It was
nightclubs.
not playing in nightclubs. It was like ghastly some of the time.
Reading your account, I got the impression there was quite a lot of playing
Yeah,
going
there
on
was
as well.
some, there was.
You also had 3 homes. You had a cottage at a place called Needsor at the mouth of the Bewley River in the New Forest.
Yeah, and just so no one gets confused, this ain't the cottage. This is 9 cottages, of which we have a tiny little 2 up, 2 down in the middle, just in case you think that this is what we call a cottage.
Okay, and you had a shack in Key West, famous party town in Florida. You called it, with great originality, the Old Cuban Shack. Yeah. And you also had, I'm sorry, you may want to downplay Needsor, but this was your London pad, architect designed in a muse somewhere in SW1, I think Pimlico. Which was clearly a rather splendid place. And the 2 of you were having a marvellous time.
Yes.
This is you in a swimming pool in Kenya. Was this...
this was Diana Delamere's swimming pool.
Diana Lady Broughton.
Yeah, the famous Diana Delamere, who Jeremy knew through a family connection, and who we stayed with as a gay couple. And it was quite interesting that she was very welcoming of us, and it was only really years later that we started to, because you know all the stuff behind Delamere and Lord Errol and the murder.
This
and all
is the subject of the film White Mischief.
Yeah.
And
what we worked out, and there's quite a bit of it in Jeremy's book, is that actually she was a lesbian. And so she was very comfortable to have these 2 young gay boys stay.
And she also she was also the one who did the murder.
Well, that's Jeremy's theory. I think that's your theory.
This is not perhaps the time to discuss that. So there you are, you're having a wonderful time, and presumably, if AIDS hadn't come along, that simply would have continued. Business ventures, travel, fairly self-indulgent perhaps, but...
Yeah. Well, pleasurable. Yeah. Challenging.
Do you ever feel guilt about how much fun you were having?
Not in the slightest, no, not at all. Because I think because of the particularly with all the clubs, etc., we provided a huge amount of fun, and more importantly, provided, very important venues for gay people to explore their sexuality. So I think those clubs were very important to huge numbers of people around the world who went to those things, and we feel proud of that, and certainly no shame.
I said at the beginning that your generation was really the first to benefit from the decriminalisation of homosexuality. Were you conscious at the time that you were privileged by comparison with earlier generations?
Oh yeah, 100%. Because even in our early days, we lived a sort of, the nightclub scene, say in London, was incredibly sort of closeted and hidden away, etc. And to be able to do, what Jeremy did was an unbelievably brave thing to do. Even the gays in London thought heaven was just like some rich kind of people who were going to rip off the gays. It took a while, with Kenny Everett helping out and all kinds of fabulous people and all those incredible Boy George, Madonna and all that to sort of come in for people to say, hey, this is like terrific, this is our place, we're away, all this condemnation, those people, rather like the Stonewall, can just, bugger off, basically.
So there you are, everywhere you go, there seem to be boys, you're having a wonderful time. All the photos seem to show the boys with their tops off.
Boys like taking their tops off.
Take your word for it. And then into this Eden comes a serpent. New York Times, 1981, rare cancer seen in homosexuals. AIDS. Originally it was called GRID, wasn't it? Gay-related immune deficiency.
Correct.
Renamed AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. And all those healthy, handsome boys suddenly turn out to be alarmingly vulnerable. And
So,
one by one, many of your friends,
10 by 10.
10 by 10, and these are just a few of them. This was Tim Romanello, a New York City designer, first close friend to die from AIDS, 1984.
Yeah.
Nick Eden, son of the British Prime Minister Anthony Eden, died in 85, first British friend to go. You are, as you say there, young and in the full flush of life and partying on, despite the what's happening around you. But I wonder if it felt like that at the time.
When time seems short, you don't waste it.
And that was definitely, you were conscious of that. That was,
Yeah.
That was the
We
approach.
all felt we were on a sort of lifeline, you know, like when's it going to hit us? And increasing numbers of people were dying and dying and dying, you know. But it was rather like in the war, I understand. You know, people danced like crazy during the war because, like, maybe tomorrow isn't going to happen, so, like, let's go dancing tonight.
Yeah. More of your friends who died. Anthony Keith. Who was Anthony Keith?
Anthony Keith I knew less well. He was involved with Crusade. He was one of the Crusade committee members, and he ran the Hardship Fund. So he was less of a close personal friend, but someone we came into contact with.
Yeah. The other
Charles Hope Johnson was considered the UK's longest surviving AIDS person with AIDS or HIV thing. And David Levy was another darling friend. You know, both of them were people who, Jeremy, I think, knew both of those people before I knew them. So they were friends we'd known a long time. There's several people in the audience tonight of whom they were also their close friends, you know.
And someone who figures a lot in the book is Connell Walsh.
Yeah.
Seen here with Jeremy. And the significance of that picture at the bottom is that Jeremy himself had become infected, as you said at the beginning, and the challenges.
Yeah. Now this is in about 95.
Right.
Jeremy tested positive in 91, and probably became infected 4 or 5 years before that. So we're looking at a face that basically has been battling HIV infection for probably 9 or 10 years. And it's the combination of the drug. I mean, if you know what an HIV face looks like from the drugs, you know, you can spot the people in the street. You know, it's rather like sort of gaydar, you know, you just use your, you know. And he's starting to develop that sort of look, you know, which these early drugs caused. Lipodystrophy and redistribution of fat and, you know, a whole load of stuff. He never had it that badly. But this was the year before Connell died. And they both tested in 91, and this is Connell in 95, and he died in February 96. And then, sadness of sadness, the drugs came along months later, and he would have survived.
Yeah.
And he didn't.
Why do you think, if Connell and Jeremy were infected around the same time, did Connell die so early and Jeremy survive?
Well, lots of reasons, but Connell, being a younger man, he was 10 years younger than Jeremy, and he responded differently to his HIV diagnosis. He was like furious, he didn't want to think about it, he kind of just wanted to pack in as much partying and boys and fucking and drugs and work and ambition and, you know, all the stuff that people would normally pack into a life. And he was furious. And that wasn't good for the virus. You know, the virus needed people to get healthy and to rest and to eat and to be surrounded by love and, you know, all the things which Jeremy gave a lot of attention to. But Jeremy was lucky because, you know, we had each other and we had love and he had a lot of stuff going on. Connell was just furious, you know. And I don't know what baggage he carried. I mean, he'd fought as a very young man as a soldier in the Zimbabwean War, the Rhodesian Wars, and I don't know, he never talked about that, but maybe stuff had gone on then. He was sort of damaged in a kind of way. He would never really talk about this HIV thing. Yeah.
Whereas Jeremy, as you say, engaged with it and was very interested in the possible treatments and tried a lot of treatments, some of them quack treatments. I mean, you did encounter on a couple of occasions, I think, people who said, we have, not necessarily a miracle cure, but we have this potential treatment, which, and we'd like you to invest in it, because of course Jeremy had the money. And they turned out to be useless.
Yeah, I wouldn't say those people were charlatans in any way. I think there was one guy who probably was a bit of a charlatan, but I think they were all just people who were trying to do their best to come up with solutions at a very, very desperate time, when everyone else was also trying that. You know, a lot of people in science and in medicine, etc. And the things that Jeremy encountered, those more experimental things, in the main didn't work out. But it could have been that they had tiny bits of benefit, and those tiny bits of benefit could have been added to other tiny bits of benefit, and he survived, you know, so like they could have contributed. So we're not sort of knocking them.
One of the interesting things to me in the book was that Jeremy, and I'm conscious that we're talking about him, he's sitting there, he's listening, so if you want to come in at any point, you're not in my eye line, but please stand up and shout. He took, on 2 or 3 occasions, what you describe in your book as drugs holidays, which seems a curious thing to do when you know you're faced with a life-threatening condition and somebody comes along and says, look, here's a treatment, you start taking the drugs, and he can speak for himself perhaps later, but why do you think...
No, let me do it. He might say the wrong thing.
Okay, you tell me. You tell me. Why did he do it?
Well, you know, all these drugs were very, very new. There had been very few clinical trials. They were, you know, no one really knew if they were going to be effective or they were going to be harmful poisons. You know, the jury was completely out on all of that stuff. And there was endless talk amongst all the doctors and amongst all the HIV community about, you know, were you more likely to be poisoning yourself to death rather than saving your life? And so naturally, Jeremy was not rare in this. You know, people dickered in and out of treatment, you know, and there were times when the doctors would say to Jeremy, you know, you're really being very foolish doing this, but it's your life you must decide, and he would disregard them, and other times he regarded it. And it was very, very hard, and, you know, it was replicated in our AIDS ARC years, many, many years later, by a whole other generation of people in a whole other different part of the world, you know, who were fed the sort of South African tale that ARVs were a white man's invention or poisons or...
Yes.
But ultimately, these drugs saved his life. And there was a moment in time when what was called the viral load, you know, the amount of virus in your system in Jeremy skyrocketed to an unbelievable 23 million, where the doctor said, you know, like, get on this stuff, get on it fast, or you will be dead in a week or two. You know, it's like, okay. Then you start...
Concentrates mind. Yeah, the fact that the two of you were in a relationship and had been a close relationship for a good many years by this stage, do you think that was a factor?
I think love is incredibly nourishing. And, you know, if you're lucky enough to have someone to nourish you and help share your fight and hold your hand and share your tears, that has to be very helpful. You know, we have a mental and emotional side as well as a physical side, and these things are all very powerful. And, you know, that might take me back to my very early days when I lived with these people in Bristol, this couple who are family relations, and they started this incredible thing called the Bristol Cancer Care Centre, based on the notion that at that time, you know, cancer care was all about this medication, and that was it. And as we all know, and it spawned across the world, all these other alternative forms of support and care.
That's an appealing notion, isn't it? It's terribly difficult to establish, as it were, scientifically, whether these things actually work. It's quite hard it's admirable. It's very pleasant, as it were, to have love and support and to indulge the power of, or to engage in the power of positive thinking, showing that actually makes a difference as against the difference that the drug makes. You can't.
No, you can't. I mean, there's that thing about a disease being like disease or dis-ease.
Yeah.
You know, and so one's trying to just nurture the dis-ease in the hope that it will have some kind of benefit on countering the disease.
Yeah. There was a race to find a cure. It
Yeah.
was going on in several countries, several parts of the world.
There was a race also to slow it by terrible Mr. Reagan, you know, this ghastly president.
Remind us of that.
Well, 81 to 89, he was the president.
Yeah.
And, you know, he never mentioned the word AIDS until 85. And then it took him another couple of years to get things going. And, you know, it really delayed the arrival of effective treatment.
Was that deliberate?
Absolutely deliberate. There was, you know, he did not like the gays, and there was a very famous kind of recording that was taken in some kind of a meeting in the White House where some of his aides, like in '83 or something like that, were kind of saying, hey, Mr. President, there's this thing starting to happen and this whole group of people are, you know, dying off. And it was like, who cares about the gays? You know, it was like, he really did not like the gays. And it was like maybe even quite convenient, you know, just like getting rid of a whole bunch of people that he didn't care. You know, it was a very, in that sense, and he was still fighting, pouring tons into the war on drugs.
Yeah.
You know, so it was very unfortunate. And, you know, there's a lot one can say, oh, please read the book because it's all in there. You know, this, actually how important the gay community were at speeding the arrival of drugs. You know, and this whole battle with Fauci, who's now become, you know, such a sort of star. You know, at one time, he was the ultimate murderer to the gays, you know, but he's been transfigured as rightly he should be, you know.
Yeah. Is it too pat to look for parallels in the development of AIDS treatments and the development of COVID vaccines?
Oh, God. Well, I mean, you know, I'm so not an expert about most things, to be honest, but I mean, if a bunch of people who are considered to be undesirables by a larger bunch of people get something, or poor people in some distant country, no one cares about it terribly. You know, here with COVID, a whole bunch of people who are like us, you know, we know loads of people, etc. And the press and staying in power and all of that, you know, masses of money got poured into it. Amen to that. You know, the vaccines arrived, it's great. That is not at all what happened with AIDS. But it arrived, it did arrive, and that was wonderful. And when it arrived, the dying stopped.
Yes, and it arrived in the form of these things, antiretroviral drugs, and in particular, a combination of three of them.
Yeah.
And you say here that so effective was that combination that some people talked of the Lazarus effect, where people who'd been apparently at the point of death miraculously recovered. And there is no limit to our feelings of gratitude and relief.
That happened. I saw it on many, many, many occasions where skeletons would climb out of their deathbeds and become healthy again.
Yeah, I wondered whether to include in the pictures you sent me. There are some really very harrowing pictures of people suffering from it. I wondered whether to include those, and I've not done so because I think most people have probably seen them at least once.
Yeah, and the picture book is available to anyone. You know, it's a complimentary thing, and it's all there to be shared.
The trouble about these drugs is that they're expensive, aren't they? And you have to go on a lifetime course.
They were expensive. Then, apparently, about 20 grand a year, £20,000 a year. But in our very fortunate country, paid for by the NHS, who hopefully paid less for them on some kind of buying kind of thing. So for people in this country, the cost was irrelevant because they were available free, and it was a miracle. Elsewhere in the world, not at all.
Yeah. And that was an issue which you came later to address.
Yeah.
This wasn't in my original selection of photographs, but you slipped it in, and you slipped it in at this point, because it's a kind of metaphor, I suppose. New Life, this is your Jeremy's nephew?
Our nephew, actually my
your brother's
child, Tom.
Yes. And around the same time as ARVs were bringing hope, he comes along. What does he do now?
What does Jeremy do now?
No, with Tom.
Oh, what does Tom do now? He went to Exeter University, he's doing pretty well, he got a great job. He actually did this amazing thing. He answered an ad in Grapevine as a completely unknown type person to a startup of 3 other people. And now he's running an office that's got about 200 people in it.
Gosh.
Which is like, wow, that's pretty good for your first job. I'm not sure it's a good thing to have for your first job. It would have been better if he'd fallen on his face. But it appears he hasn't yet.
Okay. What's the business?
It's to do with, it's a rather good business. It's a sort of modern algorithmic type way of putting together students looking for short-term work with employers looking for short-term people to help them out. It's very brilliant.
It's very of our time, isn't it?
Very of our time. And everyone in the office is like 24. You know, there ain't no grown-ups like us.
Good for Tom. So you decide, as you say, Jeremy starts Crusade in this country, and
In the mid-80s,
the mid-80s, and for a time serves on something called the National AIDS Council, I think.
Yeah, Robert
National AIDS
Maxwell's
Trust.
show-off little effort.
Yeah, we could talk about Maxwell
Best forgotten,
later.
actually.
We could talk about Maxwell later. Monstrous man.
If we must. You know, it's called them bouncing check.
I do indeed.
Such a great
I
term.
met him a number of times. I
And survived the experience.
loathed him cordially, as did many other people. Let's speak it of the dead.
Yeah.
And then you start between you this charity AIDS Arc. Now, what was the aim of AIDS Arc?
The aim of AIDS Arc was very, very focused and specific, and it was to raise money to help doctors who had portfolios of HIV patients who couldn't afford to buy the drugs, to provide the funds to allow those doctors to buy the drugs for those people.
You called it at one point an organisation that was searching along the edges of medical provision. And by that you mean seeking out these people who would otherwise have sort of fallen off, who would not have had access to treatment.
Yeah. I mean, just repeat the word I used.
The phrase was searching along the edges of medical provision.
Yeah. I think I probably used that term slightly later during the AIDS Arc experience, because in the early period of AIDS Arc, you know, it wasn't along the boundaries, you know, whole countries that had no provision, you know, like South Africa is not, you know, and so in the early days, it was just like, you know, there was no provision of ARVs to anyone in the country. You know, everyone was dying, you know, so it was easy to find doctors. Later it became, you know, you have to be more adventurous to find doctors who were working places for the drugs.
There's an issue that I know because you talk about it, that you thought about, which is that you have very limited funds, inevitably. This was, particularly in Africa, an enormous problem. Huge numbers of people infected with HIV in Africa. You could not help everybody. And there is an argument that says if you can't help everybody, then don't offer treatment to a few, because you will leave so many untreated, and that will simply add to their misery, knowing that there are other people who might. How did you resolve that in your mind?
Well, I think it's a very, very poor argument. I mean, to give you an example, we went to an orphanage run by Catholic nuns, a place called Nazareth House, still operates, and we were introduced to 8 little HIV-positive orphans. And we had money for 4 of those orphans. And we said to the sister, this is what we can offer. You know, we can save the lives of 4 of these 8 kids. And the sister said, well, if you can't save all of them, don't save any of them. Now, we just thought that was awful. So I think it's a very, very poor argument. I mean, you know, it's like, if you can save 1 in a million people, it's like the starfish story that everyone knows, isn't it? You know, there's 1 million starfish down the beach. You save 1 starfish by sticking it back in the ocean. It's fabulous for that starfish if you happen to be that 1 starfish, you know. It's like he's not going to be complaining. So,
what about the other issue, which is that, as we were saying, this is a lifetime commitment. If you're going to go on these drugs, you have to take them forever. And have you ever been in a position to guarantee that you can go on?
We've never guaranteed it. And it was one of the reasons why we were practically alone in doing what we were doing. Nearly all of the big funding agencies that we encountered and we spoke to, one of their principal reasons, and there was cost, one of the principal reasons they weren't funding drugs is they say we can't guarantee to fund drugs for these people for the rest of their lives. And we operate on a completely different basis, and we said, like, well, maybe we can just fund them for a year, and maybe in a year something different's changed, and they can find another source of funding, or we've got some more money, or, you know, something or other's happened, you know. I mean, if someone said to you, look, you're going to die, I might be able to help you to stay alive for another year, and something better is going to come along. I mean, what are you going to say to me? Bugger off. No. You're going to say, like, help me, help me. That's what we did. We never, ever offered this drugs for life thing.
Yeah.
We never did. And I'm pleased to say, and I hope I'm correct in saying, we never had an occasion when we had to say to someone, look, I'm sorry, the money's run out, go off and die. There was always something that came up, because things were moving very, very fast. There was a lot of pressure to fund drugs. A lot of one of the big charities we worked with for many years, FXB, they completely changed their mind about what we were doing and started supporting what we were doing with their money, etc. Other people came along.
Yeah.
It was fine. It was like a lifeline for a moment in time until something better came along. And it really, really did, in incredible ways that we couldn't even believe, like in I think you can show a picture of Lesotho, I can tell you
Yes.
that.
Let's just run through these. This is, you talked about FXB. This is you on a visit to Andhra Pradesh, India, to a treatment initiative run by FXB. FXB are who?
François Xavier Banu. It's a Swiss charity run by, it's a rather lovely story. The son, François Xavier, was killed in a helicopter crash on a mission, and his mother, who was an unbelievably rich person, I think owned the Patino tin, anyway, she had tons. She basically liquidized all of that and gave £500 million to start this charity.
Yeah.
And anyways, it was her outfit. And she allowed us to start funding drugs with one of her doctors in Andhra Pradesh, and that grew, and then etc.
And here you are with a FXB project in Kolkata.
Yeah.
And here we have, this is Kolkata as well?
No, this is in Nepal, and it was the most wonderful event. And I don't know if you could read that thing, but it says, what, I can't read it.
It says, Beauty and Brains in Action to Tackle HIV/AIDS, the Federation of Sexual and Gender Minorities, and that's something in brackets that I can't read. Yeah.
Well, basically, it was a whole load of young gay boys who sort of in other instances would probably have been thinking about changing their sex, or just were very, very girly. And it was a beauty competition. There were very few brains associated with it. It was mostly to do with beauty. And there was a hell of a lot of fun. And these were all the boys who I went to visit. This is the one who won, and this is her friend congratulating her. Yeah. And then this is all the girl boys that I went to see the following morning, and they kind of dragged up a bit and put on some of their tiaras and plastic flowers for the shot.
And they were all HIV positive and all?
I don't think necessarily. But I mean, they were doing something that was connected with HIV/AIDS. But these were just kids having a beauty competition, actually, to be honest. And they were great. You
mentioned Lesotho, I think. You went to South Africa and you went to Lesotho. And in 2003, you encountered some people in a bad way in Lesotho. And these photographs were taken in 2009 when you went back. And the people that you originally encountered look pretty healthy.
Yeah, they're all there. This bunch of people became what were called expert patients. Because in Lesotho, there are very, very few doctors. So one of the things they do is they train up HIV people who've had all these experiences to help out in the hospitals and the clinics to do some of the work that needs to be done on the admin side, and they are called expert patients. And Lesotho was the site of our greatest success, really, because it was a place where when we arrived there was no treatment. ARVs were completely unavailable. We funded treatment for 8 of a particular doctor's patients. She then was a well-connected Basotho lady, and she took this to her government, and it allowed the formation of the first ARV treatment program in the country. She then went to America under the banner of the Minister of Health and Social Welfare, she became, and talked to the Clinton HIV Foundation, and came back with enough money to buy ARVs for everyone in the country.
So your function, AIDS-ARC's function really, was to get the ball rolling, to and hope that it would snowball.
Yeah. And we did that, that was the most dramatic example of that.
Yeah. Bafumelele's Hospice in the Home. This is treatment for people in the home. This is Bafumelele.
It's a township in Cape Town.
Yeah.
And this is a group of people who work in the community to help people, not exclusively HIV people, but a very large percentage of, who need treatment either to get to hospital or not going to hospital or need day treatment or need help with nutrition, etc., etc. And we funded the birth of that Hospice in the Home, it's called.
This is generally a very good news story. There are moments which are less encouraging. This is a woman called Zandile, who died at Nazareth House, which you mentioned, of AIDS in 2012. You got there too late. The treatments didn't work. Why did she die?
Yeah, this wasn't an AIDS thing. I worked as a volunteer at Nazareth House for a period of time, and so Zandile just became a buddy of mine.
Right.
And there's lots and lots of reasons, sadly, why even with the availability of drugs, why people are still dying of AIDS. I mean, 700,000 or 800,000 people died of AIDS last year. So, it's not like people have stopped dying. And this was an unfortunate person who, for either she was too ill because the drugs were not enough, or maybe her kidneys were short, or she was malnourished, or 101 other reasons. She died, and people keep dying. And she was my friend, and when she died, these were some pictures that I got from her family of her in happier times. And she's my friend.
You were in Africa, you were in Nepal. This is Thailand, visiting a clinic, the Mae Tao Clinic in Thailand in 2014. This is you on the border with Myanmar and India, where you were at risk apparently of kidnaps, so the army turned out to make sure that the bad guys didn't... I'm curious to know who the bad guys are in the state of Manipur in India, but that probably is...
Well, a huge amount of heroin comes over that border.
Right.
So it's money and heroin, and that means a sex trade, and, a nice white person who's coming in, maybe you can kind of sit on them and get a bit of extra cash.
Yeah, absolutely.
That sort of deal.
And these are a picture, a cross-section of the sorts of people whose lives you're helping to save. And while all this is going along, you've gone back to partying. I mean, I don't suppose
we never stopped.
You never stopped.
No,
Indeed. This
certainly
is
not.
Jeremy's 60th birthday party. I noticed everybody's got their tops on in that one.
Sorry about that. We are 60 by then. We are 60. I mean, what's significant about that photo is when Jeremy was fighting to stay alive, he said, please, if he was a prayer, which he isn't, he would say, please keep me alive until I get to 50. Yeah. That was his sort of wish, Just let me survive until I'm 50. So here he is at 60, which for us was like wonderful, And the next picture is of another incredibly important anniversary, which is the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots, where we were in New York for. Another important birthday. And the next shot I know is of us at that period of time. And now Jeremy is well past his 70th birthday and in the audience today, which is great. And ultimately the book is what this says is, a love letter to Jeremy and a love letter to the world, and what a great, how incredibly fortunate we are to live on this incredible planet and to still be alive enjoying it.
Do you suffer at all from survivor's guilt?
We never suffered from survivor's guilt, and a lot of people did. We didn't at all, and I guess one of the reasons is because we actually rolled up our sleeves and did something worthwhile.
Yeah. Let's see if anybody would like to come in from the audience here and ask a question, make a contribution. And just to get the ball rolling, I'm going to put a question to Jeremy. Now, there is a roving mic, and I'm going to ask you, could you please take the mic over to the gentleman in the green shirt in the back row?
Maybe you should stand up so people can see what this Jeremy looks like.
Well, we know what he looks like.
Oh, we know what he looks like.
It's quite a good photo. I'm curious to know, Jeremy, because as well as reading Derek's memoir, I read yours, which you wrote, about 15 years ago? Yeah, and then updated.
2006.
And one of the things that struck me was that you, like Derek, you talk a lot about the friends who died and so on, and you talk about your business career. You don't talk about the fact that you were HIV positive and had AIDS yourself, and I'm wondering why not.
I thought about that long and hard when I was writing the book, and I decided that it would so overshadow the rest of the book that it was something I didn't want to introduce into the book except through the story of Connell, for example, and one other friend who died of AIDS. But it's such a big subject that it would have just drown the rest of the book.
Is
I
that
felt.
partly a way of saying that you didn't want your life to be defined by the fact that you were an AIDS survivor?
That's part of it, I guess, yes. Yeah, I think that's a fair comment.
But would your personal story not have been, because I mean I found reading Derek's account of it very interesting and informative, would it not perhaps have informed and helped other people? Were you being unnecessarily...
Well, I did consider writing another book just about that. But then actually, Derek's the one who kept the diary, so
Yes.
he had the key to all the knowledge and the dates, so it was ready for him to write.
Yes, I'm just looking for, I wrote it down, I'm looking for the kind of only rather elliptical reference you make in that book to the fact, and I can't find it on here, but you say something about, I have fought a battle of sorts with HIV, which in the context one assumes as a reader means you're having to come to terms with the fact that so many friends died, and then the fact that you joined with Derek in things like Crusade and AIDS Arc and so on. I wonder whether that was an elliptical reference to your own.
I'm afraid it was written so long ago I can't remember it.
That's a very good get-at. So we've anybody else like to come in? And I'm hogging the conversation here. Yes, down at the front, and please do talk into the microphone. We are recording this, so if you don't want whatever you say to be recorded, please
Don't ask a question.
That's all right. I'm happy for this to be recorded. At the very start of this, you said, Derek, that you hoped that a younger generation would take something away from your story. When you've discussed it or talked it through with people who didn't live through this, what's their reaction, and could you say a little bit more about what you're hoping they get out of this your story and Jeremy's story?
Well, I hope our story has a sort of universal appeal, really, because our story happened just to be the story of us and AIDS, or us and the homosexual, the gay thing. But everyone will have the experience of someone they love, or themselves, or someone in their family getting something similar. Everyone knows someone who's been battling cancer, or this. So part of it was just to sort of share with the world at large how we personally dealt with this challenge that came into our life, in the hope that perhaps that would be of interest or of help to other people who are facing similar kinds of things. And then AIDS, in a sort of, that thing that they put on cenotaphs about lest we forget, or lest they forget, or something. AIDS has been this unbelievably huge thing across the world. Nearly 40 million people have been killed by it. X number 70-odd thousand people were killed last year. It's still this major event, and it would be incredibly sad if that wasn't properly and well recorded. And many people, not a small number of people, I mean to say, have set down their records. But most of those records have been written either very densely and rather difficult to access kind of things, like the band played on, were written a long time ago, and they basically ended with death. And our story is a far more optimistic story. The drugs came along, people stopped dying, things started happening in other parts of the world, people in other parts of the world stopped dying, the number of people dying from AIDS has declined hugely, and now with the advent of PrEP, this pre-exposure prophylaxis, the same drug, a lot of people are released from all the notions of, safe sex and the guilt associated with sex, and we can go back to sort of enjoying sex in a more kind of relaxed way. And, so it's a really great arc of a story, really, actually, which ends in rather an optimistic kind of way, although it's not over. But it's a really, really, really important story. And I know when, It's the Sin came out, this program that Channel 4 made, which has had such an unbelievable success around the world, there were a huge number of young people, that thing was about people who were in their sort of early 20s type period, just starting out. It was seen by a lot of people at that age. They'd never been taught about it at school. it's not on the curricula at all at school. It was like a piece of recent history which is like almost like didn't exist.
Is that true? Is that
It
the
is
case?
true.
I
That's
didn't know
what
that.
I read and was led to understand. That is already terrible. And so a hell of a lot of young people said, like, but my God, that was my uncle, or that was, it's so recent, and they knew nothing about it. And I guess that's why it was so incredibly successful, because, so I hope with my book, that it will sort of lodge there and provide an important contribution to a contribution that a lot of people have made about something that's incredibly important. I hope it will have a place for people maybe in 2 or 3 generations or 200 generations who want to study that thing, that event that's happened in this period of our lives that we were so central to, and that our contribution to it will lend benefit to that.
As someone who's been to Africa a lot, South Africa, Lesotho, Uganda, we didn't talk about, on kind of AIDS art business, to what extent do you think there is still a denial of the reality of AIDS in parts of Africa? Because that was, in South Africa in particular, the government would not admit that Nelson Mandela, famously until his own son died,
Correct.
was in denial about AIDS. Is that still a factor there, do you think?
Definitely. It's massive.
How does one
There's
get...
still a huge amount of shame associated with being positive, and particularly amongst men. It's better amongst women, because women, due to the whole, when they become pregnant, have to go through the system. Their HIV gets exposed. There's a really good program that stops the prevention of HIV mother-to-child programs, which are inexpensive, incredibly effective. A lot of women have embraced the availability of ARVs, but men absolutely not. And so a lot of the people who are dying are men who don't want to acknowledge it, and when they rock up at the clinics, they rock up and they're really on their last legs, and off they go.
Do you have any thoughts about how to overcome that?
There's this great thing in South Africa, particularly called Positive Heroes, which is people who are positive who come out, like a really famous sportsman or someone like that will come out and be very public about it, which must help a lot. The quality of education in South Africa generally is terrible, and presumably that means education around the subject is terrible. But also, traditional African belief systems are very, very strong. I mean, to give you an example, there was a lady that we started helping with funding her ARVs almost at the very, very early stages in 2002, 2003, with her children were all positive, her husband had died, it was the worst possible kind of scenario. Saved her life, and she started working at the Desmond Tutu HIV Foundation, advised, as a sort of counsellor to other people who were coming for help there. And then in about 2014, so how long is that? It's like 12 years down the line, okay. I thought it would be good to make a little promotional video, and that she would be a great subject who could talk about ARVs and all of that for other things. So I went and spoke to Mary, what do you think about doing this thing? And she's just said, like, I'd love to help, but in my community, I'm a witch. And in my community, no one knows anything about this other side of my life, and they can't. Or my social standing in my community will zook.
And which was a positive thing, not that people didn't trust her, but that she was thought to be a wise woman.
A healer. Yeah.
Right.
No, witch is not bad. Witch is like a wise person who knows about traditional things and ancestors and all that kind of stuff. So it was like, wow, if this lady, after 12 years of doing what she's done, still holds on to that belief system.
Yeah.
These are very old belief systems and hard to shift, and that probably operates across.
Yes, it wasn't so much her holding on to the belief system, was it as knowing that many people in her community did, and not wanting to jeopardise.
And maybe she was sort of weirdly confused in herself too. I don't know exactly. Maybe that's right. That she had kind of bought into the Western thing, but her position within her community was important to her as well.
Okay. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes. Microphone, please.
Thank you very much. Are you able to give a longer picture of how things are evolving? How, for example, is there any immunity to HIV drugs and the cost of them. I spoke to a Czech girl last weekend who was saying that a lot of the Ukrainian refugees coming in are HIV positive. They haven't got the funding in Ukraine, and they haven't got it in Czechoslovakia to support these people. And what happens if people take drugs for a certain length of time and then they stop and then they take them again? Is there greater immunity, or people? How do people?
Yeah.
What's the longer term?
I mean, the word we'd use would be resistance rather than immunity. And it's a total disaster for those people. Because if you're on antiretroviral treatment and you stop it, you can very easily develop resistance. And when you go back on that same medication, some period of time later, there's a very high probability you will have developed resistance to those very drugs that were keeping you alive. So for those people, it's a total disaster. I mean, already it's a total disaster for them, and this is adding to their disaster. And if you're asking, what can happen to those people, hopefully the richer nations, who accept them into those countries will also take care of their health provisions, and that their lives will not be further challenged.
But does resistance develop in people who don't take a kind of drugs holiday, who don't come off and then go back on? If you just take ARVs consistently, are you at risk of developing resistance?
No. I mean, in Jeremy's case, he developed resistance to all his drugs in about 2004-05. I can't remember the exact date, and we were very lucky that he had a thing that's called a genotype blood resistance test, which was able to clarify that he'd become resistant to those drugs and what drugs he should be taking in order for them to start a new generation, new lot of drugs. And very nicely, we actually started to fund that exactly the same test for people in South Africa 10 years later than that, which was excellent. But my understanding of the science is as long as you keep taking those drugs, you shouldn't develop resistance, but you need to keep taking them on a very regular basis. And you can't, this drug holiday thing Jeremy took was like nonsense, and he was very lucky that there were new drugs coming out, but certainly the lot he's on. I mean, for example, the drugs he's been on for about 10, 12 years or something like that, and they're effective. But he's just thinking about changing from those drugs to another generation of drugs for various reasons. But he would only do that very, very kind of carefully. But I hope that answers your question about
it's a bit like antibiotics. New generations of drugs are continually needing to be developed. Because the resistance is there.
Yeah, and they are. But, you don't want to get resistant to the drugs you're on, obviously.
So there may be a limited lifespan of what can be developed.
I don't know. I mean, science is amazing. So as far as I understand, there's are new things coming up the whole time.
That sounds like a question for the pharmaceutical industry.
But yes, but currently, is it still £20,000 a year for treatment?
No, not at all. I mean, I don't know what the drugs cost in England because of the NHS, but right from the beginning of AIDS-ARC, we were not buying patented drugs. We were buying generic drugs, which were nearly all manufactured in India. And there were some countries where it was legal to use those generic drugs, and in other countries it wasn't. And in South Africa, we had to encourage other people to smuggle the drugs into South Africa, which is what happened. In Lesotho, which weren't signatories, they could sell generics. And in India, who were then not signatories of the international patent laws, they could use generics. And when we started in 2002, the drugs that we were buying cost about £380 a year. So it wasn't £20,000, it's £380 a year. And I believe now those same drugs maybe cost about £80 a year, something like that. I'm out of touch, I don't know. It's come down dramatically. But if you only earn $150 a year, which is what a lot of poor people earn, $80 or pounds a year is completely unaffordable.
Yeah. So AIDS-ARC still has a role to play?
Yeah.
And it's still going?
Yeah.
You, Jeremy, have stepped back, I think, from it. It's now under new and younger management.
Correct.
And you see it continuing more or less indefinitely?
It's for them to decide, really. You know, the need is still there, but they have to be increasingly brave, in a way, to get to more remote places, to find the people who are still not accessing care, which was one of the reasons we resigned, because, you know, like that place, Moray, it was a dangerous place to go to, you know, and, you know, but, you know, they're younger and more adventurous, etc., and so hopefully we'll continue for as long as the need continues, yeah.
And the need's likely to continue for considerable length of time. It's not going away, is it?
I guess. I mean, there's certainly no vaccine that's come up, and there's no cure. And, you know, only 1 or 2 people in the entire planet have managed to go into full remission.
Yeah. Derek, thank you very much indeed. Absolutely fascinating, and I'm very grateful. Thank you to you for your contributions, and to Jeremy for sportingly allowing me to put him on the spot. I think you're going to stay and sign some books if people would like them to be signed. Remember, every copy profits to charity. Derek Frost, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Eternally, eternally.